breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time we give it all. Lynne Scott Haggerman bringing the fire. Words that ignite hearts burning higher. Faith and power, no chains can bind. Step into the light and leave fear behind.
Welcome back to the Lynne Scott Haggerman Podcast. And I just have to say, while you guys are waiting for me to come on live, I'm back here dancing to that song that Eddie at PPN created for me. I'm just so grateful. So on my show, Truth Has No Filter, Freedom is Our Mission, and Light Exposes the Darkness. I am your host, Lynne Scott Haggerman, a survivor of child trafficking and medical experimentation underground at a U.S. University Medical Center in conjunction with the government through MK Ultra mind control. I am the voice they tried to silence, and I am silent no more. Praise God. Today, I'm also an international award-winning human resource consultant, a marathoner, an independent LifeWave distributor, a weightlifter, standing strong in mind, body, and spirit. Please be sure to visit my websites, grit.org, which is God's plan for rescuing and the aftercare of the little ones who've been harmed by trafficking and abuse of any kind, as well as adults who are still trying to recover from the effects of trauma of any kind. Also, please visit Live Younger with Lynne, that's LYNNE.com, where you'll find the X39 and Celergize. They have been integral for me being able to heal and recover from the effects of my childhood and the trauma, the PTSD, the anxiety, the depression, integral in my recovery, as well as other amazing physical effects that I've had, because it is a stem cell regeneration product, the wearable med bed, our fountain of youth. And be sure to visit lynnhaggerman.com, my human resource consulting website. Now let's get to the truth. Today, I am so blessed and so honored to welcome Dr. Tim Murphy. He's a psychologist. He is a Navy veteran. And let me tell you just a second about this. He was in the U.S. Army, U.S. Navy Reserve as an officer. And I have to read this part. Traumatic brain injury, PTSD unit at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Those are his credentials, as well as a former congressman. And he's dedicated his life to mental health reform and healing trauma. He has been on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, Newsmax, you name it, he's been on it. And to that list, he can now add the Lynne Scott Haggerman Podcast to his bio. He has written a book called The Christ Cure, which blends faith and science and personal experience into a powerful guide for overcoming PTSD and tragedy. This conversation, you're going to hear from us hope, resilience, and true restoration. God bless you so much, Dr. Murphy. Software is being slow. There you are. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me there.
So it's just an honor to have you here. And to get started, I want to start with your background. I want people to get to know you. And so could you spend the first 2 or 3 minutes? I did a brief introduction, but tell me about you. What is your background prior to today?
Well, I was born at a very young age, but I worked as a psychologist for many years at hospitals in the Pittsburgh area. Not traditional psychiatric hospitals. I worked at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, dealing with children with developmental delays and disabilities, McGee Women's Hospital, dealing with premature infants and their families, and had a private practice as well, while I was also serving on the School of Medicine at the University of Pittsburgh in pediatrics and public health. But while working that in my private practice, enjoying it thoroughly, some things came up where I got a call from then U.S. Congressman Rick Santorum, who said to me, you know, you've been complaining all these years of things we need to be doing legislatively. So what do you think of running for state senate? And I said, I don't think so. And I was absolutely insistent. So anyways, 2 days later, I'm running for state Senate. And I got into the Pennsylvania State Senate, elected twice, where I really championed a lot of healthcare reform issues. Those are the days of managed care and insurance running things. And I knew that a lot of what took place in the mental health sphere was really oftentimes shackled by bad policy. In the legislative process, people really didn't know what to do about mental illness, severe mental illness like schizophrenia, psychosis, severe depression, overwhelming trauma, overwhelming anxiety, bipolar disorder, didn't know what to do with it. For the most part, a lot of mental health is just mental health. They treat the worried well, help people kind of get on with their day-to-day things. And so I really looked at some major reforms. So I'm doing that, and one day, really enjoying it. I'm getting legislation done. I'm head of a committee. This is really powerful. I'm enjoying this work. You don't make much money in the state senate, but it's okay. I get a call from then Senator Rick Santorum, who says, "Tim, you know how you complain that there's a lot of these problems on the federal level? I said, just where is this going?" So I think you ought to run for Congress. So I didn't want to do that. So the next day I decided to run for Congress and was elected 8 times to the U.S. House of Representatives representing Southwestern Pennsylvania. It is a grueling job. Anybody who criticizes people who are in elected office saying, "You lazy people, you don't do anything," I beg to differ you. It is a grueling job. It's destructive to families in your life because you're always responding to someone else. And on the federal level, there are so many bloggers and YouTube videos and media people who are constantly trying to destroy you. A lot of times with misinformation, but there's not much you can really do about it. The misinformation is out there. The way I look at Washington, D.C. is the unique thing about the city of Washington, D.C. There's literally hundreds of thousands of people whose full-time job in Washington, D.C. is to destroy the lives of other people. And that's including the Pentagon, the CIA, but also a lot of media people. They're looking for hits and clickbait. And so they know that people who are elected officials are easy targets for that. But what I did is focus there in the U.S. House on mental health reform. I knew, again, there were so many things that stood in the way. And I just want to mention a couple that really got to me.
Yeah.
You may not know this, but in the 1800s, there was basically, if you had a mental illness, you were ignored or you were locked up, chained to a wall, beaten, abused, whatever it was. And then along came a woman by the name of Dorothea Dick. She said, "I'm going to reform this system." And she started creating these hospitals, or asylums as they were called. And there were restful places. Now, we didn't know how to treat some of these diseases, but they were restful places and people could get better. Well, it began to devolve from there into ones that also became problematic because they packed so many people into them. You could put anybody into them. You didn't need much credential, just say, take Grandma or Uncle Joe and put them in there. And then during World War II, the doctors and nurses left to go to war. And so a lot of abuses began to grow. And places that were going to be built for 300 or 400 or 500 people began to be packed with 2,000 or 3,000 people. So what happened was in the 1960s, President Kennedy's last bill he signed was a mental health reform bill to starting to get rid of these asylums and go towards community mental health. Then under Johnson, what was done is this, one of the ways we're going to do this is we're going to say Medicare, Medicaid, we're not paying anything for a hospital that has more than 16 psychiatric beds in it. So no, we're going from thousands to 16. And a hospital can't survive with 16 patients in it. So a lot of hospitals said, well, we can't do anything. And then they did other things too. HIPAA law says family members can't talk to doctors, can't share information. And they said, you can only spend up to 2 weeks in the hospital care and 190 days lifetime. So what happened was we had fewer providers. The quality of these cares never quite percolated up. I mean, if you ever go to a clinic, for example, for cancer, beautiful places, artwork in there, lots of people around, they would care for you. A psychiatric ward is the only place that's locked up. Maybe you have police there, and they're just not of enough size, sufficient size to treat people. So what happened was, so in my work in Congress, I realized we had to change these. These were set up in the 1960s. We had to change these to make it allow that now we had medications and treatment modalities we could help people for severe mental illness. And also what was happening at the same time was in these terrible tragedies such as Sandy Hook Elementary School and other school shootings, in the more recent one in Minneapolis, that these are people, for the most part, with untreated mental illness. Either untreated because they're refusing or untreated because they can't access the care or terrible family problems, abuse, etc. And every time these go on, I go back on TV and people ask me questions. Well, shouldn't we have stronger gun laws? Shouldn't we do more things to stop this? Or should we take the mother and punish her? I said, well, why don't you find out what was really the problem and what they couldn't get care for? So I championed some legislation to work on that. And I'll wrap this part of the story up with this part too, is that there was an old story called The Old Man of the Sea. I don't know if you remember this story, but
I've heard of it.
was that Steinbeck or him? I think Steinbeck. And so the old man was always fishing. And one day he finally caught the biggest fish of his life. And he said, this is great. I can haul it in. He's fighting this fish and fights it. Advance in the story real quickly. By the time he gets it to shore, so many other animals have eaten it up. There was very little left. He just gets to shore and collapses. And that's the way legislation works too. That people want to amend and change things and take things out and take credit for it. If it's good, they take credit for it. So while that is going on in my life, I decided, there's a lot going on with our wounded in the war. And I was having dinner one time with then the Admiral Mullen, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I said, I wanted to join the Navy earlier in my life. You can't take them now. He said, we'll take you now. I said, you'll take me as sitting member of Congress, the Navy? He said, sure. I said, well, I'm over 50. He says, no worry. We'll get you a waiver. So 8 months later, I'm on the hangar deck of the USS Eisenhower, taking the oath, putting my white uniform on, and learned to do that. And I would then go as a reservist once a month to Walter Reed Bethesda Hospital, where I would work in the only inpatient unit for PTSD and TBI, traumatic brain injury. Amazing work with amazing people. A lot of the people we've dealt with are people you'd read about in the paper, or real genuine heroes I got to work with. And then I did other Navy time in aircraft carriers or with Navy Special Warfare, the SEALs. So I'm doing that while I'm also continuing my legislative work and just massive schedule time working on campaigning, working on raising money and all the things you do, and not being home.
Not being home.
Not being home.
So before we continue your story there, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's wonderful the way the Lord has used you. One day you're doing this, and the next day you have a calling to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
One day you're on dry land, the next day you're on a ship. I mean, this is how our God works. But to go back in time just a bit, and just to spend a minute or two on this, but you had mentioned the trans shooter and untreated mental illness. I was reading his, and I don't know if you had a chance to read his manifesto or not, but the very last paragraph, the terminology that, because of my background and how long I have been in therapy, getting healing from PTSD, anxiety, depression, and I'm doing great, but it takes a lot of hard work. In his manifesto, he talked about being suicidal. He talked about being severely depressed, severe anxiety. He wrote about serious regrets, trying to think he could become a woman and trying to go down that path. And he had regrets about it. And that's what, we see that in these shootings. It's often, especially from the trans, this untreated mental illness. And so I was wondering, since I have you on, if you could just spend it wasn't our conversation of the day that we meet Gracie.
Hi, Gracie.
Gracie.
There's a cat.
Gracie, she likes to make appearances
Okay.
on shows. So let me kind of move her. Cats do what they want to do, and she's family. So I let her
Okay.
have the run of the house. But what are your thoughts? Just take a minute or two on your thoughts about the mental illness that he was experiencing.
Well, there's a few things I want to say about this. That this is a man who also wrote about using marijuana.
Okay.
And he said in that manifesto, he blamed his mother because she tried to say you shouldn't be going down this road of trans. And he was angry at her, as many people would be when parents tell the truth. When states are saying marijuana is great, it's a natural substance, we can make lots of money on this, lots of tax revenue come in, it's no problem at all, they're lying. They're absolutely lying. Especially for adolescents, young adults, and also we're realizing now for older adults too, that the more you use marijuana, cannabis, the higher your risk for psychosis, a psychotic break, a marijuana-induced psychosis.
Yes.
And when you have a couple of those, your chances of schizophrenia are through the roof. 1% of the population, so maybe 1.2% have schizophrenia. When you're using marijuana, those numbers go way up. And so when states say, well, this is no big deal, we can make money in this, I say, no, here's the problem. A life that is destroyed by schizophrenia, it costs the family, their income, their livelihood, their safety. That person's risk for being victimized is huge, end up in jail. Their chances of violence, being the perpetrator of violence, is about 15 times that of someone with schizophrenia and in treatment. So oftentimes they're not in treatment. Anger and agitation. There's cost to the state for police, for firefighters, for paramedics, for drug addiction, for emergency rooms, for ICUs, for how long our hospital stays. These costs go way up. States are refusing to do this. But what they say is marijuana. Many people don't even ask in the history, is your child using marijuana? So take that part. Now, I wonder, too, if he was ever in counseling. What I understand is there's other family members, siblings, with serious problems with depression or autism, maybe. And the mother had a lot of problems, her family of origin. That's all I know. I don't know other details. But what happens very often in these cases is someone saying they're depressed or anxious, they're looking for an answer.
Right.
I mean, you've probably experienced this in your life too. Like, for example, a lot of people with anorexia, they feel they're not loved. They have to make their body look better. What are they going to do? And they're struggling to find an answer. And so they choose that. Or other people may cut themselves. Because as one woman told me, at least I can feel something. She was severely abused. At least I feel something. I'm in control of the pain. So in adolescence, as you know, they're searching for meaning anyways. What teenager has not, as their body's going through changes, what teenager hasn't started asking themselves, what's happening? How do I understand how to interact with other people? So I'm going to tell you another big perversion of my colleagues in psychology.
Okay.
So someone came up with this idea that maybe it's gender dysphoria. Now, gender dysphoria is a clinical term where one is not really comfortable with their own gender, okay? But what's the treatment for that? Well, I look at that too. It occurs with, if you're uncomfortable, uncomfortable is one thing. Severe depression, anxiety is another. I look upon this to treat the anxiety and depression. And sometimes with a reality check to say, you know what, you're a teenager, you're going to be confused. But I was at a conference, and by the way, I wrote an article about this in the American Spectator. You can look up on my website, which is also drtimmurphy.com, drtimmurphy.com, about gender dysphoria, misstatements here. And with gender dysphoria, these people at this conference were talking about it. It says, well, when a kid comes in with this, a number of things, you don't really want to tell the parents everything because they may get upset. And you tell them, would you rather have a dead son or a living daughter? Because there's a higher rate of suicide thoughts and suicide attempts for someone who is going through this. And they said they decorate the office with LGBTQ flags, and they'll have the child also interact with other people who are themselves LGBTQ community. So they give this kid, this child, a community of peer pressure. And acceptance is also peer pressure. Oh, welcome here, and it's okay, and I'm feeling this way too. And then what happens, the treatments are such things as puberty blockers, which have long-term effects, permanent effects.
Yes.
Surgical changes of hysterectomies for girls, castration for boys, mastectomies for girls. So I would challenge the folks doing these conferences, wait a minute. We did this for lobotomies in the 1950s, and finally we realized that's not doing anything. We thought that was going to cure epilepsy and depression, and it didn't. You mutilated people.
That's right.
They said, well, studies show that 99% of people are happy with this. So I looked up those studies, and what they said is these studies were done by the doctors and other people who performed the surgery. Now, most people will say, are you really honest with your doctor? And most people say, not totally. And if it's the surgeon who did the surgery and paid for it, or insurance paid for it, are you going to go back to that surgeon and say, I don't like what you did? So what they said in these articles, the social workers and psychologists and pediatricians would surround the child with support and say, you're going to be okay, it's going to be fine. And they would work with them to accept that. And then they wouldn't reverse because they had to pay for it. But here's another sick thing. Almost half of states have a law that says, like if someone came to me and said, the guy says, I think I'm gay, but I don't really want to be there. Can you help me? I'm not allowed to. The law says you cannot do conversion therapy. In Minnesota, it very specifically says you can help a child move to be trans, to change your gender, but you cannot help a child who's questioning to go back. That's against the law. You can lose your license. So this is a great perversion in Minnesota and many other states. He was questioning But if anybody tried to help him, they would have been breaking the law. So what does he do? He's dealing with this tremendous distress. Maybe some people were even saying to him, someday you're going to need the surgery or puberty blockers and have the emotional strains with that. And he was angry at the world and angry at his mother and other people too. I think his parents are divorced. So all these things are taking place. His life was a mess, and he didn't have access to the kind of care, compassion, loving care to say, you don't have to change your gender. You're okay. And surrounded with acceptable people. His mother was apparently very religious. Like many kids, he was rebelling against that. And we don't know all the depths of where that took place for him, but it sounds like he was angry at God, as many kids are, because he saw his life in trouble. So I look upon these things with regard to gender dysphoria as the big lie. Now, are there some people who have that thought, there's confusion? Yes. If they want to make a decision as adult, what do? I can't have no standing in that. But I think with children, it's a permanent mutilation. It goes against God's word and against the sanity of anyone else to tell some child, if we castrate you, you're going to be better. And by the way, they talk about the higher risk for suicide for someone who feels gender dysphoria. Here's the other thing. 12 times higher rate of suicide attempts. 12 times. 1,200%. A 42-year longitudinal study out of Denmark said that they had over 700% higher risk for a suicide attempt that required medical care, and 3.5 times, so 350% higher rate of suicide death. So anybody who says this is going to be your panacea, you're going to do better, it's a big lie. And I hope that states may change it. Minnesota and Governor Tim Walz is not going to change it because they bought into this lie. And it's a shame because a lot of people are being harmed.
I agree with you. It is a major lie. And whenever I was little, so many things happened to me. And I saw with other children too, underground in the laboratories. And what used to be underground is now above ground. And this is absolutely the mutilation of the children. I was watching a clip the other day of a girl, and she was just crying through the whole clip, 14 years old, very depressed, anxiety, confused. And it's exactly like you said, all these adults, I mean, she can't get a tattoo, and yet they were cutting her breasts off.
Yeah, awful.
And it's just, she can't drive, she can't drink, and yet they're mutilating her body and encouraging her to do that. It's a heinous crime against humanity. It's a heinous crime against the children. And now, of course, she is more mature and has realized exactly what the adults who are responsible for her. And frankly, it reminds me of my childhood. My parents were responsible for me, and they failed. they failed. And it's happening above ground now. The parents are responsible for the children, and they have failed. And our professional institutions have failed for them to say that, do you want a dead, in this trans case, a dead boy or a live girl, as if that's even real. Because God created two sexes. That it is impossible for a man to become a woman. It's impossible for a woman to become a man. And I think it's time that we stop the idiocracy conversation that is even possible, because we're harming, in this case, the children, and then they become old enough to do these horrific crimes. We're hearing more and more of the stories of the little ones with the bullets all over themselves in the hospital in Minnesota. I read one today, the little girl that threw herself over the therapy dog. So he wasn't shot, or she was a male, but so the dog wasn't shot. It's just because that's a child's instinct, is to protect. So all of the systems have failed. And so I love your words on this. I just thank you.
Well, they should be paying attention to healing where there's people like this young man, Robert, I'm not going to call him Robin, or where they were struggling. Another thing that happens with kids while they're in school districts are mandated. They have to care for them and look at other things if they're struggling mentally. And I don't know, I wonder if he was homeschooled. He might have been. And so therefore not have had access. But once they turn 18, it's done. They make decisions on their own. Remember a few years ago, there's the shooter in Florida, probably 40, 50, 60 incidents with policemen, mental health officials. Once he was done with school, that was it. Adam Lanza, who did the shooting at San Diego Elementary School, once he turned 18, 19, he's out of school. mother's struggling. I don't know what to do with him. So all these things take place. And there's also forces out there that says you should never force anybody into mental health treatment. So, well, wait a minute. What if they don't even know they're sick? What if they don't even know they're psychotic or they're bipolar? They don't know because there's a condition called anosognosia. Anybody who's dealt with someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia, they don't know they have Alzheimer's. So they may say, I need to get to school. I said, no, Mom, you're 90 years old. You're not going to school. But no one would hesitate that if grandma was out walking along the road in her nightgown in the snow, let's take her to the hospital, she's sick. But if someone who is severely mentally ill, psychotic, doing things like that, say, we got to take you to the hospital. I don't want to go, I'm fine. Okay, let you go. And that's the sad thing we have where people misunderstand mental illness. I want to ask you, Lynne, when you were talking about, and I guess it relates to some of your history too, that when doctors are buying into this idea that mutilating kids is a good idea to cure depression, they may have read a couple studies, but they have not read all the studies. In fact, I think the American Association of Plastic Surgeons says we're not doing this anymore because the evidence is not there to help kids. The American College of Pediatricians says this is wrong. The American Academy of Pediatrics said, oh, it's okay. And in Finland, Scotland, Sweden, Denmark, United Kingdom, they said, we're not doing this anymore. The evidence isn't there. But doctors would still do this. And I got to think, okay, you may have had scientific information you're reading in part, but you're not questioning. In order to question these things, you have to have a moral compass. So not just say, well, can we do this, but to say, is this right to do? And as things were done on you, I'm sure there was people around who were not asking themselves the question, is this right? Should we be doing these things to kids? I mean, I'm assuming that's questions you've dealt with.
Very much so. And what's interesting too is I know you love to research. In December of 2024, the National Security Archives released 1,200 pages of documents from the CIA that have never been released before. You know how under the Trump administration, we're getting all of these documents. And in those documents, the CIA talked about how they were given funding by the government to create annexes in U.S. medical institutions to experiment on U.S. citizens. And they were going to experiment. This started in the 1950s. They were going to experiment on the mind for mind control. And they said to go where no human had gone before. And when they went to recruit, when the CIA went to, they wanted the best of the best U.S. Medical professionals. And they said at first, to your point, people said, no, this is unethical. We can't be experimenting on U.S. citizen brains without their consent, without their knowledge. It's the same with castration and mutilation of the children. This is not right. This, people have to stop and say this isn't right. But then the CIA documents went on to say shortly after that, it was easy to find people to do it. They wanted to go, the medical professionals wanted to go where no man had gone before. In the furtherance of science, they wanted to proceed. So I have to think, I net out two different ways or 2 points. I believe that some people are so in the furtherance of science because this is all an experiment. To mutilate the children, to give them hormones that aren't their biological sex hormones, to give them these drugs that have never been given before. It's a massive experimentation on people, plus money. It just boils down to there's a lot of money to be made. And the university started those programs because they got a boatload of money.
Mm-hmm. And it was right for Trump to say, we're not doing this anymore. And as a matter of fact, you can lose other credentials when you do it. Money can motivate people. Money, power, lust, all those things can motivate people to do troubling things. And there's not a human being alive or dead who hasn't been tempted at some time by things. That's why one has to remain eternally vigilant on these things. And particularly, as when dealing with trauma, we become really weak. The devil likes trauma. Because when loneliness, trauma, all those things to the point where people say, I need an antidote for this, or at least find a way they don't have to feel so much pain.
Do you have statistics, Dr. Murphy, on The percentage, I was watching a gentleman on Tucker Carlson that Tucker posted the last 24 hours that said that 1 out of 5 U.S. citizens are on SSRIs. So our population, we have 25% of the people have anxiety, depression at some level. Is that a statistic you're?
So the percentage of people who at any given time might have a diagnosable psychiatric psychological condition is about 20%. Lifetime, about 50%.
Okay.
And of that 20%, a good number of them are on some SSRIs. You also have things like the homeless population. About 40-50% of the homeless population has a serious mental illness that needs major treatment, but most of them are not treated. Of the prison population, it could be 40-80% have something. By the way, the homeless population, about 80% will have some level of a mental illness, maybe depression, anxiety. But here's some things about this. Look, sometimes medications help. I don't deny that, particularly with severe mental illness. For mild issues, we are quick to medicate. But we know that exercise, good diet, sleep, and faith are very, very important to healing. When I talk about in my book, The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal through from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD, I say, here's some secular things. Even if you don't agree with anything else, that frontline offense against depression is to cardio and weight training. You don't have to do, look like you're ready to compete in Miss World or Mr. World, but do something, because it actually stimulates the brain to create something called brain-derived neurotropic factor. It burns off the stress hormones and you do better. Because otherwise you have inflammation and that leads to feelings of depression, anxiety. A proper diet, getting rid of food additives and other things in there, processed foods. I like to look upon, because I studied the life of the Apostle Paul when I was going through my own garbage in life. And I said, why didn't this guy have tremendous PTSD? I talked about this in my book. Why wasn't he overwhelmed? Because let's see, he used to chase down Christians, have them prosecuted, persecuted, executed. He was absolutely emphatic about this. He gets knocked off a horse, blinded. Now all the people were his friends before he doesn't trust anymore, and the people who didn't trust him, he's got to convert them. He travels around. He gets beaten with rods 3 times, whipped 39 lashes 5 times, stoned and left for dead, run out of town, has to escape through a window, imprisoned. All these things take place. And he should have had the symptoms of severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, suicidality, gambling, philandering, whatever, been involved in all those things, but he wasn't. So I asked the question, why wasn't he? And I looked to see if anybody had written a book about it. Nobody had written a book about this. This is where the Holy Spirit spoke through my fingers. I'm not a biblical scholar, but this book came out of it, saying that why wasn't he? And we look at those things that he had. I guess in some other era would he have been diagnosed with mental illness? I'm getting to your part of the question here, but it's the issue. Are we overdiagnosing people? Absolutely. Do some people need treatment? Yes, but we have gone so far into the idea that everybody has got to have their own therapist and work it out, and yet we know that, as I said, physical conditioning, proper diet, proper sleep, spirituality, and looking at how your mind processes information and attitudes, which I use the mnemonic, by the way, it's called FASTER: fitness, attitude, sleep, mental training, eating, and relaxation. Those are the concepts that are there. And those people who are regularly practice religion, not just believe in something ethereal and spiritual, but regularly practice their faith. In fact, the number is like 4 times a week or more. Their prognosis for getting out of depression, anxiety, PTSD is far better than anybody else. And yet, you know what? Most psychologists and counselors are admitted that they're atheists or agnostic. And they think, well, I could just help the person understand some of these things. They say, well, no, you can't. If you don't believe yourself, how are you going to help someone? Particularly if someone's really struggling with their faith, how you can help someone. So, but what we have is those numbers out there, about 20% of the population, and we could be doing a lot better to help people with that too.
So what percentage of therapists are atheist and agnostic?
Over half, about 52-55%.
I have a marvelous trauma therapist, and she's a godly woman, spirit-filled woman. And I have seen her since, I want to say 2009, because she was helping me through a very difficult divorce. And that's when my first repressed memory hit. And thank God she was there. God is so good to us, and he positioned her in my life, for such a time as this, whenever it was time for my true healing to begin.
Mhm.
And but before I went to her, I prayed about it, and I called the institution and I said, this is what I want. And at
Mhm.
that time, I didn't remember, 95% of my background, but I knew well enough to say, I want a Christian woman. I want a woman. I want a Christian,
Mhm.
and I want someone who has extensive experience. And so that was very, very helpful, because it would have been impossible for an atheist or an agnostic to help me, because God and Jesus and Holy Spirit are such an integral part of my healing.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's so important. But of those who are believers, and the majority are, although those numbers are dwindling down because kids are not raised anymore with faith, and it becomes negative. There's a lot of persecution against Christians. Last year there's 400 and some church attacks, arsons, etc. But what happened is therapists don't understand the value of this, and they'll come up with some kind of secular thing or pretend they understand. But one of the things I talk about in my book is that Jesus and Paul gave a lot of choices. And it wasn't like, well, you can kind of do this. When the 10 Commandments came down the mountaintop, Moses didn't say, I have here the 10 suggestions if you feel like it. He was like, these are commandments. And when Jesus said things as hot, cold, I don't like lukewarm, tell me where you stand. Jesus sometimes used some pretty strong words, too, that says you need to hate your mother, hate your father, and love Jesus. Now, he didn't mean hate in the sense we do it. But Jesus was really good at using hyperbole to make a point. Sell everything, take nothing with you. And the apostles say, oh, okay. But he meant that you have to make your commitment wholehearted. And when it comes to using some of the principles of overcoming PTSD, um, I think you used EMDR was a value to you.
Yes, EMDR.
Very helpful to help a person relax, calm down, because with the whole system's on hyperdrive, it's hard to calm down enough. And people also use prolonged exposure therapy. You talk about the event and work on calming yourself. Cognitive behavior processing, you talk about the event, you calm yourself. And those are really good to help one get back in touch with themselves and feel grounded with regard to the trauma. What they don't do is take care of everything else. Families are a mess, marriages are a mess, parenting's a mess, finances can be a mess, all these things. And so we have to work at all these other things. And this is where, in my book, I talk about these things too, because look, I'm very compassionate with the people I work with. I focus now on veterans, first responders. Very compassionate because they've really been through hell. A friend of mine, a police chief, he sent me pictures of his police car shot up with bullet holes, windows all shut up, because a mentally ill man, not on medications, drunk, comes out, starts shooting people and says, kill me. They had the restraint, they didn't do this. But trauma all the time. Well, what comes from this is we have to make choices. So in my book, I lay out a lot of dichotomies. You're strong or you're weak. You have hope or you're hopeless. You have faith or you're empty. And all these things I talk about, you forgive or you condemn. Because Jesus said, you got to make a choice here. And I love it. For example, one of the choices I tell people they have to make a decision on is healing. I ask all my clients, my patients, after they tell me their initial story, I say, okay, before we do anything else, I need to know, do you want to heal or do you want to hurt? And I wait for their response. And they say, well, what's involved? I said, no, I'm not going there yet. Do you want to heal or do you want to hurt? Well, I don't know. I said, well, that's an honest answer, but you got to make a decision. Well, can I kind of heal, but I identify with my hurt. I identify with my trauma. I said, we're not going there. Make a decision. We'll work on all those other things after that. Because I remember where the scene where Jesus comes upon the lame man at the healing waters of Bethesda, right? Jesus said,
Right.
you want to walk? And he goes, oh, you have no idea how tough my life is. I've been ill my life. I can't do this. The water stir. No one's helping me out. And Jesus, pick up your mat. I love it. It wasn't like, can I hold your hand for a while? Can we talk this over? Or someone comes in, I'm blind, I want to see. I say, okay, you want to see? Your faith has saved you. And that isn't just saying your faith in Jesus as Lord and Redeemer saved you, but you got to make a decision. This is tough for people with trauma. I'm sure you experience it too. Sometimes we don't want to give up. We don't want to give up our trauma. It's identity. We don't want to give up our diagnosis. And so we stay stuck in it. As one person said to me, a person who quit therapy for a while but came back, and she said to me, I don't know how to do normal. I know how to do sick. I'm going back to sick. Wow, what a profound statement. that it was painful for her, but she had a way of adapting to it with all kinds of other symptoms. And eventually she came back. So those who don't understand the role of faith and the Lord Jesus and what can happen there with healing, I don't know where they go. I asked my patients, who said, well, I'm kind of an atheist, but I said, well, is it okay if we talk about biblical things from a historical perspective? Yeah, okay. But I say to them, if you don't believe, where do you go for hope? And they don't have an answer. So, well, I kind of just look at the next day. So that's not hope. That's living in automatic, man. Those therapists who don't know how to do that and they're afraid of learning it, well, they do what they can.
I love your analysis of the choices. So I have two thoughts to share from there. I spent 5 years in Al-Anon, which is for friends and family of loved ones of alcoholics. And alcoholism runs very deep on both sides of my family. And the Lord asked me, so that, we're not puppets on strings. We have choices too from the Lord. So he asked me if I would go there as part of my healing. And that's part of my healing journey is the Lord God or Jesus Christ. They'll say, and they'll put it like this, will you go here? It will help your healing. But it's up to me if I choose to go there or not. And they've had me go to other towns for conferences or hear speakers. But in this case, Al-Anon, I was there for 5 years. And then they told me to leave, that I'd learned enough. And so this is how my healing journey has been going on since the first repressed memory hit in 2011. Well, when I learned in Al-Anon, I think it's step 10, but it's we became willing to let God remove this from us. But you have to be willing. And part of that step is to make a column. What do I get from keeping this awful thing? What do I get if I'm free? And people have to actually think through your question, which is, what am I getting from being ill? What am I getting from this mental illness, from this PTSD? And some people, I heard them in programs say, I like it this way. As miserable as I am, I get attention, I get government money, I get, and they would have a list of things that they would rather have than their healing and their freedom. And I have to say, Dr. Murphy, it astounded me. It astounded me that people would keep that prison. It's a prison of the mind.
You probably heard the saying, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.
Yes, I've heard that saying.
The variation when it comes to what you're saying, it says, the certainty of misery is preferable to the misery of uncertainty. And so people don't trust where they can go. In my book, I talk about Paul and the whole healing process from PTSD is the stages of resilience, resistance, recovery, and renewal. If I can briefly describe those. Yes. In the resilience phase, we're building up, we're preparing for the battle. And I talk about choices, the dichotomies of strength over weakness, being disciplined versus disorganized, having humility versus hubris, and operating from plans versus chaos. All that's to set up resilience before the battle even occurs. Then in the resistance phase, now we're in the battle. And that battle can be we're going through trauma right now or the trauma of our memories. And then our choices are courage or fear, fighting versus quitting, having a community versus being alienated, or being vigilant or vulnerable. You need those things in the middle of a fight. Recovery then is hope versus despair, healing versus hurting, guilt versus shame, and forgiveness versus condemnation. And then getting into renewal, which you talked about that last phase. I should say, in resilience, you're building. Under resistance, you're arming, the armor of God. Under recovery, you're embracing. I need hope. I need to heal. I'm going to take guilt instead of shame. Shame says I'm broken beyond repair. I'm a mistake of creation. Guilt says I messed up and I need to reconcile. And then forgiveness, very hard to do, but I'm embracing these things. When it comes to renewal, it's letting go. It's accepting. Faith instead of having doubt, of trust instead of mistrust, accepting grace versus feeling empty, and having a mission versus wandering. I think while grace is, as you know, grace is the love where we don't deserve it, we get it. But the opposite is emptiness. So what happens is you're describing in that phase for Al-Anon and for AA and anybody else going through this, it's a leap of faith to just accept, kind of like surrendering. Okay, God, I'm accepting. You're there. I believe you. You exist. I'm going to trust you. And think of times in our life. For me, there was a time I read about in my book when I was rock climbing, and I was on a cliff face. It was about 100 feet tall, but you take ropes, you go down the next level, you take ropes and go down, and rappelling down. It's a nice thing. I've done it before. And at one point, my rope gets a knot in it. And there's this thing called a figure-8 ring, which is on your harness. It looks like, eights. And they're famous for tangling. And I get down there and I'm snagged. The guy above me, I said, can you send me down? I need to untangle this. Can you send me down some of our anchors? He said, I don't have any more. Well, I got to get out of this thing. And there was this much of a toehold for me to put my feet on. And I'm there and I said, well, I'm not going to jump because it's about 40 feet down. So what I had to do is lean against the rock, my face, everything else against the rock, unhook myself from that, holding onto the rope, and blindly untangle myself just with feel. This has taken it felt like an hour, going at it over and over to finally got it, and then rappelled the rest of the way down. And the whole time praying, let me do this, let me sense this in my fingers. I cannot see. There's tremendous trust that goes with that. I got to the bottom and say, thank you. I'm never doing that again. But that's what it is sometimes with trust. You just have to accept it's there. There's nothing else I could do. Wait for a rescue team or something. But I just felt, I didn't even think of a rescue. I thought, I just got to do this. Just have to trust it's going to be there. Sometimes we're foolish with our trust. We need to be reasonable, but that's what trust is, accepting what's there. Wow.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. When it comes to Paul, during my years, and I continue to work on healing and recovery, it's very, very, very hard work. It's a daily issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'll still see my therapist once, if not twice a week, because there's just a lot to recover from. But I remember years ago studying Paul myself, because I looked at his life and I thought he should be suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
because he killed all these Christians, just
Mm-hmm.
killed them, and then became one. And if that happened today, the guilt and shame and horror that would overwhelm a person for what they'd done, they'd have to forgive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be like a huge mountain to overcome. And then allow others to forgive them for what they've done. It's huge. In today's America, I can't see Paul surviving that. I have to say, just because it would, I'm not sure we have the resources. Now, the Lord Jesus Christ can do anything. I
Mm-hmm.
can say that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I love your book. And that's why I love the solutions that you laid out. And you're talking about Paul, because if he did it, we can do it.
Yeah,
People
right.
people will look at me, Dr. Murphy, and I've been through more than most that are listening. And I will have people reach out to me all the time and say, you know what, Lynn, if that can happen to you, and you're sitting here as the sane woman that you are, highly successful, I can do this too.
Yes. That's a great way of putting it, Lynn. That is, a lot of times we'll compare our traumas. Oh, your trauma is bigger than my trauma. I would see this all the time in the military, that someone say, well, I don't have it as bad as that guy down the hall. He lost his legs. Another guy says, well, I don't have it as bad with, I'm gone. My legs are gone, but I'm blind. And there's another guy who's blind, so he's worse. Well, here's another guy who's worse because he's just in a vegetative state. You can always find someone who's worse. But the idea is to find someone who's healed.
Yes.
I tell people, it's okay when you're seeking a counselor or therapist to say, what did you overcome? I want to know you. Now, therapists were trained, don't reveal your life to them. First, in the preface of my book, I come right out. I start with a confession. Here's where I messed up. Here's where I destroyed my life too. I'm taking full responsibility. I hated myself. I didn't want to wake up in the morning. Every morning I said, oh gosh, I'm alive again. I don't want to be here. We have to come to terms with that and understand that to follow mentors like you, people who've been to hell and back. I tell people, I saw hell. I don't like it. I don't want to go back there. I saw poverty. I don't like it. But there's a value in that. And that's all Jesus wants of us. It's okay if you're broken. Come to me. I want the sick. The well people don't need a physician. Come to me. And yeah, people are hesitant to say, can we survive that? but there's a lot of trust that goes with that. And Paul was amazing. He talked about there was a thorn in him in
Yeah.
his side. He prayed like 3 times to have it relieved. And people say, well, that's probably his PTSD, or they say maybe he had a problem with his back injury or maybe something. And they come through this whole medical analysis. I said, what does it matter? He's telling you, this is all I'm going to reveal to you folks. He does say, well, I was shipwrecked, I was beaten, I was floated around a piece of wood for a day and a half, I was bitten by a viper. He names his list. He went through about 30 or 40 major life-changing traumas. But he says, but I still compare them. It's nothing compared to the suffering of the Lord Jesus Christ and what he's done for us. And I would say compare ourselves to Jesus's trauma, not to somebody else. And certainly don't go down the arrogant road of, well, this person's being punished, they're getting karma for what they did. And please, come on. Back off. That's why forgiveness is so tough, but it's an absolutely necessary part of trauma healing. And I tell people these 6 words: God forgives. Did it, period. It's there. It's out there. God forgives. And I instead of saying God forgave, I say God forgives because it keeps going on, because we keep messing up. Others might. If we hold out for forgiveness from other people, we may never get it. People say, I don't like you. I hate you. And okay, I'm sorry. I ask for your forgiveness, but I can't live for that forgiveness. And so God forgives, others might. The last 2 words, I must. We are commanded by Jesus. You must forgive. You have to forgive. Peter says, how many times? Jesus says, 7? No, 7 times 7. You got to forgive. He taught them the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Give us our daily, and forgive us, forgive other people. He says it. And yet a lot of people are like, well, can I forgive in general, but not that specific? Nope, it's there. And it's tough. And a lot of times, the healing process, people say, wait, if I'm going to get better, does that mean I have to forgive? Yeah. Well, I don't want to forgive. Okay. We'll get you partway there, but you're not going to be able to go all the way. It's like, can you imagine if you go in the hospital and you say, doctor, what do you need? Well, I can give you this medicine. I have to give you a shot. It'll heal you. Well, I don't want a shot. I can't heal you. Well, can't you do it any other way? Well, I mean, like magical incantations, bibbity bobbity boo. No, can't do it. This is what it takes to heal from this. It is very tough when people have harmed you. You talk about a family of origin with alcohol. My dad was an alcoholic. I love him. He rests in peace. But he drank away our money. We had 11 kids in the family. We didn't have much. And in the evenings, we had to track him down. He was at the VFW bar, the American Legion bar, some other bar. My mother said, "You find where your dad is." And I've driven home with him at times when I was a kid, when he was just drunk out of his mind. I don't know how he lived, but and sometimes he'd get pretty aggressive with my mom that I witnessed. But brutal times. But I've got to forgive. That's the way it is. I mean, he had his own suffering, and alcohol was his way of trying to deal with it. But that's part of what we have to deal with too.
I agree. So I'm going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'll share how I forgave all of the perpetrators. So let me see if I can play this clip real quick.
A life empowered is closer than you think. We're all looking for a better way. Reimagine what's next with a new sense of exuberance. Why not power on like you mean it? Or power off blissfully? A better sleep is a better awake. You've never moved like this before. With the energy nature intended. Imagine reprogramming the way you look at the speed of science, at longevity, at exhilaration. It's next level rejuvenation. Take control of your well-being from the inside out and outside in. The light within is ready to ignite. Be the light. LifeWave.
Please go to liveyounger.com, where the X39 and the Celergize will regenerate your stem cells. It is the wearable med bed. It is the fountain of youth. And I have to say, Dr. Murphy, when I saw the rock climber, of course I thought of your story.
Been there.
I've been there, done that. She didn't
Yeah.
look like she was hanging on. Praise God.
Yeah.
When it comes to forgiveness, I wanted to share just a minute. Whenever I had so my first repressed memory came back in 2011, and then just it came back like a flood. And 5 years of assault, whenever you're little, is a lot of memories to go through, especially everything that happened. And I'm a Christian woman, and I knew forgiveness. I knew that. But this is what I had to do in the beginning, because I did it. I'm also a businesswoman, and I did what I called a business transaction with the Lord. So I would say, for every memory, I forgive them. I forgive them. I forgive them. And it was like a contractual agreement. It was a business deal, and it was the best I could do. I didn't believe it and I didn't feel it, but I knew I needed to do it. And the Lord accepted it, because that was the best I could do at that time. And then the more I healed and the more recovery I had, the day came where God's like, will you go to this place? And it's for your healing. If you would like to go, and I'm always all in. So I went. And when I went to that event, things happened, and I was able to forgive every perpetrator, every pedophile, every medical employee, every government employee, every last one of them, from the heart. And now, of course, I pray for their salvation. Then the Lord had me go to another event, and it was the same thing. Do you want some more healing? Yes, Lord. So I was off to that event. And the next thing I knew, I forgave my mother from the heart, for real. And she, to me, was the primary perpetrator, because she was the one that would send me to those places knowingly and willingly. And whenever that happened, because of that, fast forward, I was able to lead her to the Lord Jesus Christ, and she's in heaven to this day, and I know it. And so the power of forgiveness, that what it can do to people, all people involved in whatever aspect of the trauma. And then one day the Lord came to me, and I had a vision. I have visions. I have that a lot from my childhood. I'm very prophetic. And Jesus took me by the hand, and I was a little girl again. And we went to the green pastures from Psalm 23. I go to heaven quite often, and they're up there. And the cross was there, and he was on the cross, and he was beside me holding my hand as a little girl, too. How he does these things, I don't know. But in heaven, there's a lot of telepathy. People don't move their lips when they talk. And he said to me, without moving his lips, he wanted me to forgive myself. Well, I was like 3 years old, in this vision. And the 3-year-old girl in me, all she could say was, she did icky things, icky things. And so Jesus said, put him at the feet of the cross. And she did, the little girl part of me. And then it was over. And Jesus took my hand, and we went skipping away. And in that instant, I was able to forgive myself, even though it wasn't my fault. I was forced to do things, but nonetheless, there's a forgiveness aspect for myself. So I love that your book also addressed forgiveness. Now, does that mean forgetting? No.
Right.
Does that mean hanging out with the perpetrators and some kumbaya loving hug? No. That tells me how to protect myself in ways I never knew to protect myself before, because first, like you said, you have to accept what happened. And with that acceptance also comes the ability to forgive and the ability to heal.
That's right. When you accept, I mean, accept like in terms of it's okay. It's not okay, but accept, okay, it happened. I tell people you cannot unset the sun that's gone there. And when you look at the stage of the trauma, there's the initial event, there's a memory loop, and then there's what I call reaction. So initial event or events, especially with chronic trauma, oftentimes a part of it is repressed with amnesia, but they can come back. But when those events occur, you can remember vivid details. In fact, people with PTSD remember more details than other people. Say, "Wow, no big deal. I didn't see it." Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, memories, everything goes with that.
Yes.
But that event is over. But where we get, and the body reacts, the adrenaline, the surge of cortisol, cytokines, the whole HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, our body is ready to fight or flight. We're pumped up. The event is over. But then when the memory loop happens again, and again, the amygdala, the fight-flight center of the brain, alerts, like a smoke detector going off. Smoke detector is very powerful, very important, allows us to survive, but it doesn't understand the difference between the house is on fire or grandma just blew out the birthday cake. All it does is send out the cortisol, send out the stress hormones, and those things pump up, and they actually hurt our body with inflammation, which lead to depression, anxiety, emotions, joint problems, chronic illness, all these things. So this is where therapy takes place. So we're going to go after those memories, but understand their memories. They don't exist anymore. Putting them in words means I can deal with them now. You can touch them. But the third thing is the reaction, where we start hyperventilating, sweating, turning red faced, heart racing, all those things. And that's our reaction, like, oh my gosh, something's happening to me. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not better. I think I'm terrible again. What's happening? I'm not getting better. Calm down. Do some deep breathing. Meditate. Pray. Get strength. It's your body reacting as it should be. It's trying to protect you. So I tell people that means your system's still working. It's trying to protect you. The work is done in the other phase. And forgiveness is an important part of that, to say, like you said, it doesn't justify. It doesn't say they're not responsible. It doesn't say they don't have to go to jail if they've done something wrong. But it goes to this level of, it's like guilt and shame. Guilt means you got to reconcile. I'm sorry. You make reparations. You really feel it. Shame takes us out of there. We can end up feeling the arrogance of self-pity. I'm so shameful. I'll never get out of this. I can't get better. No, you got to get better. Forgive. Because otherwise you're spending life condemning. And particularly if you're condemning someone who has harmed you, they're still running your life. They're still in your day to day in your face. When you forgive, it's saying, I don't have to do this anymore. Go, get out. Your excuse. I forgave you. Not in a nasty, mean way. I forgive you, get away, but say, you don't have control of me anymore. You're not abusing me anymore. You can't hurt me anymore.
It's freedom. It is freedom. And it's freedom. Whenever I went through my forgiveness phases of all the others, it was freedom for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was letting go of the ties with them, completely letting go. And I know this is your first time on my show, but every show I'll play my LifeWave clip, and I'll share. LifeWave is a technology that it saved my life. I started using it in February of last year. The Lord led me to it, and he told me he wanted me to start using non-invasive healing modalities,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to big pharma medication, which I hadn't been on for years. But it calmed down my PTSD and anxiety by 70%.
Mm.
And so it helped me. I wouldn't even be able to speak today had it not been for that. And it's for those in the audience who haven't heard about it, it's a light and frequency therapy product. There's no drugs or chemicals, and it releases GHKCU copper peptide, allows our bodies to create that, which in turn regenerates stem cells, which goes into the repair process. And when I started it, the Lord gave me Psalm 118 and Psalm 120. And he said that if you use this, it will restore the dew of your youth, at the cellular level. You know, you mentioned it's not just the mental illness that is part of the problem. It's the physical body. It's the financial. It's all aspects. And with the physical, it's so LifeWave definitely helped me with the mental and the physical, but so does the fact that and again, I feel like I'm a mentor, just as you are, of people who can overcome. But the marathons and the weightlifting and trying to eat healthy organic food, processed food is chemicals. They call it food, Dr. Murphy, but it is not food. It's chemicals. It's a bunch. Our bodies are starving for nutrients. The water we drink has so many harmful chemicals in it. And so you're right. This is a, and I love this part of what you talk in your book too. This is it's a holistic. It's all of us and our environment. If we allow toxic people to stay in our environment, you can't heal.
That's right. And in loneliness, sometimes we accept those. Loneliness can make a person do strange things, and an empty heart can drive you insane. But that's why our relationship with the Lord is so important. And you know what? We trip and fall. We get back up. You keep trying. Every one of the apostles messed up and got up. I would say mess up, fess up, get up. That's what it comes down to. We've all got to do that. I enjoy working with veterans and first responders. You know, the police who've got something every day. Paramedics have a terrible life, but the worst day of your life is every day for them. They keep going. They're dealing with drug overdoses and murders and suicide and maybe delivering a baby or helping someone talk them off a cliff. But all those things are important. We can do those things too. I tell people when it comes to this book, I call it's a handbook for the hurting and those who love them. And also I say it was a very painful book to write, very painful book for me to write, but a very hopeful book to read. Because I would go through and tell the stories of people who struggled, and for Paul and self-reflection. And not only, by the way, is it available through traditional book sales sources, There's a company called Logos, Logos, who has just started to put this in digital form, that if you get it from them too, they also have a format where if it's a biblical reference or something else, there's a hyperlink on it, it'll jump to other information. But the reason I'm saying this too is proceeds in this book go to run my program for veterans and first responders. I don't get a lot from each book. I get $1 from each book. And that goes in my program so that they can be treated for free. So I'll say that in there too.
I love that ministry.
Yeah, it's.
Pardon me?
drtimmurphy.com is my website. I have some old podcasts on there. They're evergreen. They're not time dependent. Some articles I've written, and people can reach me through that website too. But you have to abbreviate drtimmurphy.com.
Yes, and thank you for that too, because we have some radio listeners, and in the ticker that's been scrolling by, you'll see Dr. Tim Murphy without the .com for the website. And I'm thinking that your book, The Christ Cure, is available anywhere books are sold.
Yes, Amazon or Goodreads, whatever it is. Give it a good 5-star rating. That helps too. That helps too. Whatever the algorithms or things that help promote it. People who've read it, I don't know who these people are. They just write spontaneous things. The best trauma healing book I've ever read. Or I'm a counselor. This finally gives me a guide. Because I read it also not only for people who are hurting and those who love them, but also for counselors who don't know how to engage biblical principles in the healing process. I'll go through a lot of psychological principles here of healing. I'll say, here's how it works from a biblical perspective, but also for clergy. About 85 to 90% of clergy say, I don't know what to do when it comes to counseling. They get very little training, a lot of biblical training, but not counseling training. And sometimes they'll say, well, just read the Bible more, pray more. No, you need practical solutions. Like, I'm hungry. Well, just pray for food. No, you have to go out and get food. So it helps clergy, it helps individuals who are counselors, it helps family members. It's designed for people who really are looking for ways to help those who are trying to heal from trauma. And I tell you, I'm a believer. I have seen people heal from trauma that was unspeakable, but they get there. And I've also seen people staying in the quicksand of trauma that's not that bad, but we can talk ourselves out of anything. So I hope people will see this book as, I typed it out, but I'm not smart enough to write this book. I've written other books before, but this one really came from the Holy Spirit. So I hope people will take a look at it.
Well, God bless you on your mission and your ministry. I encourage everyone to purchase the book, The Christ Cure. It's we have 20% of people in the United States, and I know this is an international show, so that statistic probably applies worldwide, if not more so, having problems with mental illness at some level. And this is a solution. And I know the folks watching me, patriotic, faith-based Christian folks, and this is a tool book and a handbook and an excellent start and program to give you what you need from a biblical standpoint to be able to start helping yourself or helping your loved ones. And even with my trauma, I have not had the opportunity to read the book yet. I read all the reviews, I read the content, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Thank you so much, Dr. Murphy, for sending me a copy, because this is one of my steps in my healing journey. When the Lord presents something, and this is my encouragement to the listeners, when the Lord presents something to me and says, this is going to help you with your healing, I jump in with both feet, because healing is a process. Healing takes time, especially the more extensive trauma that you have, or if you're still in the middle of trauma. This is a definite tool in our toolbox, and I'm so grateful to have it in mind, Dr. Murphy.
Good. And maintain hope. Always have hope.
Always have hope. Well, God bless you, and God bless everyone for watching and tuning in. Until next time, this is the Lynne Scott Haggerman Podcast, where truth is rising, and so are we.
Light breaks the shadow of the weary heart. Truth cuts the dark like a flaming dart. Voices rising strong to lift the call. This is the time.